So, today in this podcast, I try to explore the concept of meaninglessness through the philosophy and literature. From the beginning of time, there have always been people who believe that there is no essential meaning in the universe, and then there are many who eventually are driven to this belief system. So, what is this meaninglessness? Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment states pain and suffering are always inevitable for large intelligence and a deep heart. The really great men must, I think, have great sadness on earth. And then we have Shakespeare during the Renaissance, when in Macbeth he has beautifully summarized this perspective. Out, out, grief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Imagine a state in which one believes that there is no meaning in the universe, and there is no point in even trying to construct a meaning. This is the foundation of nihilism, an idea that proposed by many but reinforced strongly by Nietzsche. In Will to Power, Nietzsche writes, not only that everything deserves to perish, but one actually puts one's shoulder to the plow one destroys. Most people who are driven to believe in this ideology have standard three-phase response to address this. Either they embrace it, or they accept it, or they reject it. The ideology remains static, so their belief remains static, only the responses differ. While embracing it, one creates a meaningful framework for life, such as religion or a spiritual framework or probably a philanthropic framework, where one observes on the numerous cases on how miserable life has transformed to good by adopting a cult of such practice, whereby free will, liberty, and responsibility, driven by virtues and morals, can create their own reality. Similarly, while accepting it, one simply accepts the ideology of the lack of any meaning and live with it. It's a plain life and it passes as time flies, and eventually it will end when the time comes. And lastly, those who reject it adopt extreme measures such as suicide, where the belief takes a strong hold and the perception is that nothing can be done about it. Eventually, one believes that life is too sad or boring to continue. Fortunately, there is a thin line that dangles between all the three approaches. As Nietzsche says, the highest values devalue themselves. The aim is generally lacking, and the why finds no answer. Especially youth, generally misguided with ideologies and philosophies towards life, get in an easy trap of either embracing the ideology or rejecting it. One can easily transpose the whole ideology with nationalism or extremism, where with embrace of nationalistic ideas or extremist philosophies, one ends up choosing a less intellectual path that leads to intellectual laziness, emotional weakness, and whenever this pseudo-awakening is lost, one falls in the trap of suicide. Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment has written, the darker the night, the brighter the stars, and the deeper the grief, the closer is God. Similarly, the whole idea of independence and free will leads to anxiety of action. Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, in his work on concept of anxiety states, since we are free, we are in charge of our own choices, and the heaviness of these choices prompts anxiety. Anxiety may be compared with dizziness. He whose eyes happen to look down into the yawning abyss, hence anxiety is dizziness of freedom. So how do we look at things? What should we do? Do we change our perspective? Jacques Derrida, for example, asserts that one can never be sure that one knows corresponds with what is. We are unable to grasp anything with certainty, and absolute is merely in fictional forms. So with acceptance and rejection, one denies the beauty that life has to offer. No matter how meaningless the universe might seem, kindling the intellectual light may pave way for creation of such meaning, but to what level? What relative inference do we draw? The thought still prevails what should be done. Mikhail Bulgakov in Master and Margarita says, what would your good be doing if there were no evil? And what would the earth look like if shadows disappeared from it? After all, shadows are cast by objects and people. There is the shadow of my sword, but there are also shadows of trees and living creatures. Would you like to denude the earth of all the trees and all the living beings in order to satisfy your fantasy of rejoicing in the naked light? To respond to this, Schopenhauer explains in The World as Will that music and art can be important tools for such an awakening, and it might be a lens we might want to wear to look at the universe. Well, I am strongly convinced by arguments of Albert Camus, a philosopher who always denied being a philosopher and eventually got a Nobel in literature to prove his point. He says the only way to deal with the unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. This is the founding idea of absurdism. I rebel, therefore I exist. Absurdism is where one believes that searching for a meaning is in conflict with actual lack of meaning, but then that is how it is. One accepts it and yet rebels against it by accepting what life has to offer. So if I refer to the example of Shakespeare about the candle and life, but now with a Camus lens, it will be, O light, this is the cry of all characters of ancient drama, brought face to face with their fate. This last resort was ours, and I know it now. In the middle of winter, I at last discovered that there was in me an invincible summer. I believe absurdism ideally is most satisfactory response to this meaninglessness. It not only teaches acceptance and rebellion for the same things, but also remains practical, maintaining one's intellectual integrity. It is the path for stimulating one's intellect and eventually falling in love with oneself. To conclude, in my opinion, absurdism is about working within human limitations but without abandoning our respect for ourselves or the truth. It is to adopt a belief structure that allows us to trick our evolution-soaked brain into extracting some meaning from the universe, while never forgetting that system itself is a trick. The key here is awareness. That's the fundamental difference between rebellion and surrender. Such a person can go to a spiritual center with family and mentally pray in some sort of secular but semi-spiritual way, while simultaneously knowing the fact that no one is listening. A person who has surrendered will say that they believe in their construct completely no matter what is the response to it, either the embrace or rejection, and that it will provide a true meaning to the universe. However, someone who has not surrendered, someone who follows absurdism and the rebellion may say they have adopted a scaffolding for practical reasons, but they know it's artificial.